is Hong Kong like the most special place for you photography wise? Does it stick out compared to some of the other places you lived or visited?
Oh, I spent a long time there, and it kind of gave me my career in a way, you know. I mean, I started working as a photographer when I was living there, so it kind of gave me my opportunity to become a photographer. So it's in that sense, it's definitely special. And I had life there. I mean, friends, relationship, you know. I mean, it was as much as home could be anywhere, you know. And yeah, I mean, I liked it from the first moment I stepped foot, you know, in Hong Kong in the early mid 70s. And you know, again, it's sort of, you know, I wanted to show it the way it kind of, let's say, really was, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
rather than glamorized. I mean, even um, you know, I mean, even in those days, I mean, it was a very neon saturated place, but
hmm
not in a way that anybody cared about. And of course, like with so many things, now that Hong Kong's neon is kind of almost gone, I mean, everyone, of course, now cares about it. And that happens everywhere. You know, you start paying
yeah.
attention and caring about things after they're almost finished. So, but I mean, you know, Hong Kong's it's a special place, and it continues to be a special place.
A lot of what you've created over time, especially in the past, is almost foreshadowing what's very popular now. I think Hong Kong is a perfect example. Like all of the neon lights and a lot of the kind of night architecture, especially in terms of lighting, that's all kind of trendy now. A lot of people like to find gas stations and restaurants and theaters and stuff that clearly have like neon lights. So it's a fad now, but in your work, it doesn't feel like a fad. It's like it's almost just like you're showcasing this environment that includes that, but also has kind of this spirit of its own. I want to ask you some practical questions here because you're doing night photography, you're shooting on transparency. What are we talking about here in terms of gear? You mentioned the tripod. I'm curious what cameras maybe were more conducive to that nighttime stuff, and also what film stocks were the ones that you were using.
Probably, I mean, a lot of Kodachrome, Ektachrome. Those were the first two
Yeah,
film stocks I used and used them a lot.
and those are low speed or slow films, right?
Yeah, they are. I mean, the original version of Kodachrome was ISO 25, you
Oh
know,
my god.
and then and then they came out with Kodachrome 64. So that was kind of
Yeah.
the default film speed, really. Fujichrome 100. So I mean, they're all relatively slow films, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And you did you ever shoot with negative film? Was there a kind of a period where you was a toss up, or you kind of always just leaned directly into the transparency?
Um, I started using a medium format camera in the early 90s. And with that, I started sort of experimenting a bit with color neg. You know, very different palette, more kind of pastel-y, less contrasty. You know, it doesn't have that sort of deep blacks that you get with transparency film and the saturated colors. So it's a
Yeah,
very different feel. And you know, like any new medium, you have to experiment till you kind of get comfortable and start to
sure.
understand what it can do. And you know, when I moved to Shanghai after Hong Kong, and I made a book about Shanghai called Phantom Shanghai, and that's kind of a bit more of a mix. I mean, it's mostly transparency film on medium format, but there's a little color neg in there as well. So it wasn't really till late 90s, early 2000s I started using more color neg kind of routinely, let's say.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's awesome. The look, I feel like transparency film is very underrated nowadays, partially because there aren't that many options. So, and they're very expensive. I think that probably puts people off. But you're right. There's such a specific beauty to the look that you get. Real quick, newclassicfilm.com is now a full-blown web shop. We're carrying film from your favorite providers such as Kodak, Fuji, Ilford, etc. Our goal with this project is to offer film at the cheapest prices possible, so make sure to go check out the link. A few things are out of stock right now, but definitely sign up for the newsletter so you don't miss out when we have stock again. How would you approach people, especially for photos where they knew you were taking their photo?
Well, you know what it's like in the street in big cities. I mean, let's say like New
Yeah.
York, London. I think you can include Tokyo and Hong Kong in that category. I mean, the streets of public space, and you have maybe a reduced sense of your own kind of sense of privacy once you're
Hmm.
moving around the sidewalks in these big cities. It's very public. So, you can take advantage of that by, making pictures and, without attracting too much attention. And I think everybody who makes pictures in the street of people has their own way of doing it and
Of
their own
course.
sort of sensibility and their own kind of notions of what's right and wrong, acceptable and unacceptable. And so, I mean, there's two kinds of pictures, aren't there? There's the kind of the candid one, and then let's call it something like more of a portrait where you stop and ask somebody and, it's very clear, and then there's something maybe in between where it's sort of like maybe you do it through eye contact or body language and,
Hmm.
it's not such a big ask because you don't come right out and say it, but maybe just people see you've got a camera and they don't move away and you take a picture and maybe move on, or I mean, everybody has their own sort of sensibility about, I think, what they're looking for,
Hmm.
and that kind of maybe dictates your approach. What kind of picture are you trying to make?
A lot of people that listen to this podcast do a lot of street photography. And I'm going to say that in a very generic way. So it could be the portraits, it could be the candids, it could be anything in between, whatever you think. I'm just curious, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's looking to kind of cultivate a style, or maybe just kind of like find a momentum, a rhythm in going out there and doing street photography?
Well, I mean, I think if people are already doing it, that's 90% of it. If they're
Yeah.
already out there, I mean, I think maybe getting started is maybe for a lot of people the harder part.
Hmm.
Like just kind of dealing with photographing strangers. It's a pretty big step, really, isn't it? I mean, you're kind of in a way asking for something and not really giving anything back. But
That's very
but
true.
but I mean, I think at the same time, I think you are. I mean, you come in peace. You're there to kind of to make something from out there, meeting people, however you do it. Whether it's with your eyes, with your camera, face to face, asking. I mean, I think the the really interesting thing about street photography is that everybody makes it their own. There's a deep history, and there's a lot of great practitioners. Um, but when you start doing it, you're going to be doing it your own way, and maybe you have somebody whose work you like that you try to imitate. Let's say straight out, you're just trying to make pictures like that person. But I think
Mhm.
eventually you're gonna go off, or you're gonna want to go off on your own path and take it to your own place.